We've been learning the laws of making a mistake in prayer, missing the laws of the person misses a prayer, and can they make it up? And we learned yesterday the conclusion of the Gemara, the end of 26a, which told us that there is a difference. If a person purposely misses one of the Shmona Esreis, one of the regular prayers, if he purposely misses it, it is called bitel. Bitel, he omitted it on purpose. In such a case, it is called a me'uvas lo yuchal liskoin. In Ecclesiastes, it uses the term, this is a crookedness that cannot be fixed. And you can't make it up. We mentioned you can do a tfilas nedava, you could maybe do a gift prayer, but it's not really making up for the sin that you did. It's doing something positive, which hopefully will somehow even out, but it's not actually fixing it's not a tashlumin, it's not a correction, a rectification for that sin of not praying, of omitting a prayer on purpose. However, if a person misses a prayer by mistake, and the word mistake by mistake is a very general term, there's many areas that can be included, many situations and circumstances that can be included in missing a prayer by mistake. But all of those situations that can be included in what's called a mistake would be considered acceptable to do a makeup prayer. And the way to do a makeup prayer is that once you're praying the next prayer, you add on another prayer or a makeup. So you're doing the first prayer, and you, for example, you missed out a mincha, let's say, you missed out an afternoon prayer. So you're going to do the Ma'ariv, the night service. And while you're doing the Ma'ariv, the night prayer, you can then, after you finish the Shmona Esrei of the night, you could say, you know what, I'm going to do an additional Shmona Esrei as a tashlumin, as a makeup, as a rectification, and it'll cover you for what you missed, the missing out of the prayer mincha that you missed. So again, you do the first you do the obligation prayer, and then afterwards you do the extra makeup prayer afterwards. Yes, Robert.
Okay. I just, in understanding this, if I understand correctly, if inadvertently you forget or you can't do something, it's not that you're guilty. I mean, there's no guilt in it. It was that it was an opportunity, and you can make it up. Sort of the forgiving nature. Again, with the best of intentions, you don't do it, so you don't have this guilt over you that you didn't do it at the appointed time, which I find to be very nice to understand and giving. Correct. So that's what I think is important to me. That again, with the best of intentions, sometimes they don't work, and then you don't
can do a makeup. Yes,
exactly. And that's a good thing. I find that to be a very good understanding of one's devotion to Hashem and being able to be a part of a continuity of a praying community.
Right. So very good point. Good point. The Shulchan Aruch, the way it's brought down in the Shulchan Aruch chapter 108, in the Shulchan Aruch Harav, in the Alter Rebbe's Shulchan Aruch, he brings, it is not called a mazid only if a person omits it b'shot b'nefesh, b'lishum tirda, with purposely missing it out without any worry that caused him to miss it out. But if a person was involved with their financial issue, that he shouldn't lose money, and because of that, he ended up missing out on his prayer. So he was involved in some situation that he was in the midst of dealing with, and he missed out on a prayer, even though he didn't act appropriately, because you're not allowed for monetary reasons. You're not allowed to miss the time of a prayer just for monetary reasons, but you sinned, and nevertheless, it's not called a mazid or a paisheya. You're not called doing it on purpose, and a paisheya, a rebellious person, in regard to the fact that you wouldn't be able to get a tashlumin, you wouldn't be able to rectify it. No, you are really able to rectify such a thing, it is not considered a mazid. It is not considered a purpose. And then it says an example of a person who was shikr, and he didn't know what time the time was passing to pray. So he's considered a oines. He had no choice. He wasn't in his own mind, even though he started drinking after the time to pray, which would give him a little guilt in a certain sense. He shouldn't have started. He shouldn't have started drinking then. He should have davened first. But nevertheless, it's not that he purposely missed out on the prayer. He thought that he will have time to daven after the wine subsides.
Well, then it seems that it's that French court decision that Moroccan or whoever it was threw the woman out the window because he was addled with marijuana was not so bad.
I'm not sure if you're talking about some movie, something I should know, or
this is an actual
famous
fact. There was an Arab that broke into a Jewish woman's apartment in Paris, threw her out the window saying Allah Akbar, and the French court said, well, he was addled by marijuana, so therefore he wasn't responsible. So we've got the same thing here.
That's a very good question that you're asking. Very, very challenging question, but I think there's a big difference. And the big difference is that when it comes to damaging, when it comes to causing damage to a person, to property, you still stand responsible. When it comes to getting atonement from God, and it comes to an act of rebelliousness to God, is this called rebelliousness to God? And on this, we say that it is not called rebelliousness to God, that you missed a prayer. Again, you didn't actively ruin things. You passively missed out on an opportunity to pray. So there are a few differences between your case, but it is a good question, I must say. But we definitely would not hold a person innocent if they cause damage to someone, and and cause damage even to their property. So there is a term in the Gemara used, Adam muad li'olam. A person is always considered responsible, and we're responsible for our actions. But here we're talking about allowing a person to do a rectification prayer, a tashlumin, a makeup prayer, because they missed out on a prayer which they were guilty. But was their guilt, was it purpose? Was it done with anger, malice, and purposely, or is there room for some understanding of their mistake? And here we're explaining that there is a little less. It is not the extreme case that we don't give any opportunity for rectification, a full rectification. We don't give such an opportunity. So that's I think that's the explanation. But it's a nice point that you bring up, Raymond, and very well thought out. Okay, Susan, you have a question?
Yes, not a question, but it's something I realized. The timing of all the prayers, the davening, is so precise, and I realized the reason is that the more Jews practice at the right time, the more Hashem is glorified.
Right.
Worldwide, I'm saying. In other words, if we all pray at the same time, we're much more united and it's much more important.
Right. That's an interesting point that you mentioned. On the one hand, it's not perfect because there are different time zones. So it doesn't end up being exactly the same time. But on the other hand, there is a concept of davening when the community davens, that even if a person can't daven with a minyan, but at least they daven at a time that the community is davening, there is an element of everyone davening at the same time. There's many of these gatherings that they try to do and tell everyone exactly at 12:30 today, we're going to do a Tehillim of Psalms, and they send texts and emails and who knows what, and blast it. It's a very nice idea that we should have unity, everyone davening at the same time is very powerful. And so these are that is an interesting point. The Lubavitcher Rebbe used to often gather the children in his community, in his town. He would tell his followers, also gather them. We need to do something to avert some type of decree in heaven. So he would have the yeshiva come in. I mean, it wasn't a daily thing, but it happened once every so often. There was some type of a terrible decree in heaven, and they would have the children, because it says children have a breath that doesn't have sin because they're young. So when they pray, it can accomplish tremendous things. So he would makes a type of rally and gather the children together and say some prayers and somehow avert some heavenly decree, and that's also another idea of unity and averting some negative thing and having powerful prayer. Okay, so we mentioned this idea of even a shikr, which is, this is surprising. You might think that this is somewhat, he's a little guilty for drinking and not being responsible, but at the same time, Hashem gives him some type of a understanding. He thought maybe he would have time to daven afterwards. He didn't purposely not daven, and what happened was, and then he started drinking more. Once you drink one drink, you sort of are too tipsy to say no to the second drink. And, so it's sort of like one leads to the other, and then you forgot to pray in the end, and so another example, and this is much more common, is that a person was involved in, let's say, their taxes, or they were doing their, accounting, and they did daven, or they're in the middle of fixing something and their house broke, and they're in the midst of fixing something, and you get involved and you get busy, and you think, oh, I'll finish it in time to daven, I'll even be able to go to shul, and you keep working, and then everything takes longer than you think. That's the way everything works. It always takes longer than you expect, and you ended up missing the time to daven. So that's not called purposely missing daven. And you can make that up. Even if you started in a irresponsible way, which means that you weren't allowed to start doing this type of work before the prayer, and you started in a sin. In other words, there's certain work that you're not supposed to start when it comes time to pray, and you transgressed that law, and you started that work. Nevertheless, this is not called a purposely missing out on a prayer. You thought you would daven afterwards, and ended up that the time just passed, and then next thing you knew, it was already 8:30 p.m. and it's too late to daven Minha. Or next thing you knew, it was afternoon. What is that?
What kind of work is not allowed to start?
So there are laws about, for example, number one example would be eating a meal within a half hour of within the time to start davening, or to there are laws about fixing certain things, or the thing is that if you have a set minyan for a set time, so you can rely on the fact that you're going to go to shul, and you go at a certain time, that you don't have to, you're allowed to be lenient with doing these works in a certain, you're allowed to be lenient with working, because I have a minyan at 7:30 every night to daven mincha. So I don't have to stop at 2:00 when it comes time. The earliest time to daven mincha is, let's say, approximately 2:00. I'm not in a situation where I would have to stop what I'm doing to daven mincha, because I have a set minyan that I go to every day at 7:30. But there could be laws there are laws about not doing work before it's time. Like, for example, if you're not going to have a minyan later, you really should just daven mincha first, and then do everything else. So 2:00 is the time. Let's say you're in Utah vacationing, so you would daven mincha at 2:00, and then get back to your hiking and who knows what, because you're not going to have a minyan later, and you shouldn't really be doing stuff before instead of pushing it off for prayer. But what the Shulchan Aruch here is saying is, even if you transgress that, you're still not called that you omitted the prayer purposely. So that's an important point to know, because a lot of people wouldn't think that. You would think that that's called purposely omitting a prayer. Yes, Ben.
What page are we on? What are you?
Well, I'm discussing 26A, but we're about to turn to 26B now and talk a little more about 26B.
Oh, you are still on A. Okay.
I was talking about the final line on 26A, where it differentiates between a mistake and a purposely missing out on a prayer. Bitel and ta'ah, the two different words, very important words. Bitel is purposely missing out on a prayer, omitting a prayer, and ta'ah is missing out by mistake on a prayer. Now, the next page, we started and we spoke about a very interesting question that the Gemara did not give an answer for. And we were dealing with the fact that a person davened the double prayer, the makeup prayer, but it seems that he messed up. It seems that he, from the way he davened, it seems that he did the makeup prayer before he did the obligatory prayer. Again, when you're supposed to do a makeup prayer, you have to do the obligatory prayer first, the current prayer first, I should say, the current obligatory prayer first. And then when you do your makeup prayer, you do the rectification prayer afterwards. So, for example, you missed Mincha. First, you have to daven Ma'ariv, the current obligatory prayer, the night prayer. And after you finish the night prayer, the Shemona Esrei, then you will say another Shemona Esrei for a makeup for Mincha. So first you do the current prayer that you're obligated now, and then you do the previous prayer that you missed out on. But we gave an example in the Gemara where a person, it seems that he did the opposite. How do we see that? Because when you daven Ma'ariv after Shabbos, you're supposed to add in a paragraph, what's called the Havdalah. When you add that paragraph in, that is the night prayer after Shabbos. Now, if you have to do a double Shemona Esrei because you got to make up for Mincha, which Shemona Esrei should you do the Atachin Antanu prayer in? So logically, you should do it in the first prayer after Shabbos, because that prayer is the one that is expected to have the Havdalah in it. It's the Ma'ariv service. The prayer that you do afterwards is called the makeup prayer for Mincha. That prayer has no need for you to say the Havdalah in it. That is to make up for Mincha, and it's not necessary to have the Havdalah in that second prayer. You would say the Havdalah in the first prayer, because now that's the time for the Havdalah service. It's in the Saturday night prayer, Ma'ariv. So that prayer, you say the Havdalah. If you say Havdalah in the second Shemona Esrei, which is the makeup for Mincha, what does that show? That shows that the first Shemona Esrei that you said, you missed out in Atachin Antanu, you skipped it. In the second Shemona Esrei, you said it. So what you're showing is the first Shemona Esrei you did having in mind the Mincha makeup prayer. And the second one, what does it show? You had in mind to do the night prayer. So what you did basically is you switched around the order of the prayers. So that is the case that the Gemara talks about. Again, the Gemara talks about a case where instead of doing Havdalah in the first prayer, you switched it and you did the Havdalah only in the second prayer. So you're doing two prayers, two Shemona Esreis Saturday night. You should have done the Havdalah in the first one and skipped it in the second one. And here you did the Havdalah in the second one and you did it and you skipped it in the first. And what you showed was that you are having in mind, on the first prayer, you're having in mind for the makeup, and the second prayer you're having in mind for the current Ma'ariv prayer. So what did the Gemara say? The Gemara said, you know what? Your first prayer is worthless. It didn't work for you. Loi also loi. It does not work for you. And the Gemara understands it to mean, you know why it's not good? You skipped Havdalah. And you're not, and if you miss Havdalah, when you're supposed to say the Havdalah, the Atochen Antanu, if you miss that out, you got to repeat the Shemona Esrei. And the Gemara questions that and says, what do you mean? I missed Havdalah, I missed Atochen Antanu, I have to repeat the Shemona Esrei? We know that you can, if you miss it out, you don't have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. And therefore, the Gemara ends off with the word kasha. Kasha, this is a good kasha. Why, if you have to do two Shemona Esreis and you miss out in the first one, the Havdalah, why do you need to repeat the Shemona Esrei? If you miss out Havdalah, you never need to repeat a Shemona Esrei. So the Gemara ended off with the word kasha. And I mentioned to you that in the back of the Gemara, there's a commentary called the Rif, and he explains that there is a difference, there is an explanation. The Gemara doesn't end off tiyufta, that it proves wrong, the previous statement, but it just ends off with kasha. And the reason is because there really is an answer. The Gemara doesn't give the answer, but there really is an answer. And that answer I've been hinting to, and we sort of touched upon, and that is that there is really a big difference, because in this case, you revealed that you messed up the order of your prayers. It wasn't that you missed out in Havdalah, but it's that you messed up the order. You put them in the wrong order, and that is not acceptable. Yes, Ezra.
Okay, so here you mentioned the fact that you forgot to say Atachon Antanu.
Right.
My question to you is, suppose that you don't say it in Atachonen, and you realize that you didn't say it in the Atachonen. You can say it in Shema. Can you say in Shema Kolenu?
I don't believe so. I don't believe so. I haven't heard of such a thing. I could look it up, but it's not in my memory. I don't have such a thing that you could make it up in Shema Kolenu.
Is there any other place before the end of the Amidah?
I don't believe so. I believe it's only there in that bracha Atochen Antanu that you could say it. And I believe if you didn't say Hashem's name of Baruch Ato Hashem, then you could still say it. Once you say Baruch Ato Hashem, then you just finish off and you skip it. And you don't have to repeat Shemona Esrei. It's it's fine. You're going to do Havdalah on wine later, so it's no problem. Now there is an issue that if you do mess up and you eat in between Havdalah and you skipped Atochen Antanu, and you eat something, then you might have to repeat Shemona Esrei. If you didn't make the Havdalah on the wine yet, and you ate something, I think there's sort of like a rabbinic obligation to go back and say Shemona Esrei again, because you did some type of a act of assuming that it's Shabbos is over without doing any Havdalah, not in the prayer and not on the kos, not on the wine. But as long as you don't eat anything or do, it could be there are certain works that if you did, you also need to you might need to daven Shemona Esrei again. But the idea is that assuming you didn't do anything, you can always make Havdalah on the kos. You don't have to repeat Shemona Esrei. In the normal situation, you don't have to repeat Shemona Esrei. You just go home, and when you do the Havdalah on the wine, you're fine. Even if you drive, you can drive. You can do malacha. You can do activities that are not allowed on Shabbos, as long as you don't eat. And it could be that it mentions other like more serious type of.
Is that the number that comes?
Okay. The riff I was telling you about that brings this difference. He also brings up what happens if you did Havdalah in both, or if you didn't do Havdalah in any of them.
Probably the one you spoke to before.
What would happen then? What do you think? If you did Havdalah in both, the first Shemona Esrei and the second Shemona Esrei, would you need to repeat it? Again, our Gemara said that if you did the Havdalah, the Atochen Antanu in the second Shemona Esrei, but you skipped it in the first, then you need to repeat a Shemona Esrei. And the way we explained it is, according to this riff, the reason why you would need to repeat a Shemona Esrei is not because you missed out Havdalah, but it was because you revealed that in your mind, your first Shemona Esrei was a makeup Shemona Esrei, your second one is a obligatory Shemona Esrei, and you messed up the order. You have to always do the obligatory Shemona Esrei first, and afterwards you can do the makeup Shemona Esrei. And that's why here you did the makeup Shemona Esrei first and the obligatory second. Now you got to do another Shemona Esrei, because this way your obligatory Shemona Esrei will be first and your makeup will now be afterwards. So you end up doing 3 Shemona Esreis, but the first one was not counted. The second one is considered the first Shemona Esrei for you because it's obligatory. And then the third one will be your makeup Shemona Esrei. And the first one was not counted. And this way you have it in the right order. Now, what happens if you said Ha'atochen Antanu in both Shemona Esreis? What would happen then? Would you need to repeat? Or what happens in a better case where you skipped Havdalah in both? You missed out, you did not say, you omitted the paragraph of Atochen Antanu in both. So the Rif mentions here that if you didn't do Havdalah in any of them, you do not have to go back, according to this logic. Because you're not going back because you skipped the Atochen Antanu, you're going back because you messed up your order. But if you miss Havdalah in both, then we assume that you did the right order. If you do Havdalah in the second and not the first, then we say, you know what, you must have had in mind the wrong thing. But if you messed up the order, I'm sorry, but if you skipped Havdalah in both, we don't know that you messed up the order. So it's up to you. I mean, you'll decide. If you feel you messed up your order, then you can say another Shemona Esrei. But if you didn't, you're fine. So that's basically the way the Gemara is understood. That's the answer to the question that the Gemara asks, is that there's a difference between messing up the order where you have to go back and do another Shemona Esrei, or if you miss Havdalah, you don't have to go back. Yes, Ezra.
In the case where you missed in both, okay, I can understand because you're going to say Havdalah afterwards. Okay, so that will take care of missing in the first one, and the second one is your
makeup, so you don't need it.
The makeup for Mincha.
Right,
Okay?
you don't need it.
But how do you logically explain for the second case, for the second example that you gave where you said it twice? Would you then say, yeah, he said Atachon Antanu, but he still said the prayer with the 19 brachot, and so therefore that makes up for what he missed for Mincha, and that's it?
So correct. You're doing the 19 brachas. I mean, the fact that I believe you're asking with the fact you added in something that you're not allowed to add in. Is that what you're you're wondering? Like, how could that Shemona be acceptable?
You thought that if you're going to have to do a repetition, it has to be a full repetition, including Atachon Antanu, which was probably incorrect.
Right.
And so therefore you said it.
Right.
Okay. So how? So you then say, it was a mistake. It was a mistake, but you still said the 19 brachot. So therefore, you're done. You're fine.
Well, this is the thing. There is an argument if you mention something that you're not supposed to mention. I'll give you an example here in Shulchan Aruch. It does mention this idea that what happens if you say Yalav Yavai in the wrong time. When it's not Rosh Chodesh, and so if you remember that so you just stop where you are, even in the middle of a bracha. If you don't remember till you finish the bracha, so some say that mentioning other days does not obligate you to go back to the beginning and or to the beginning of the blessing that you mentioned it. And some say that it is considered like interrupting with the middle of a prayer, that you would need to go back. And
Go back to where?
either to depending on which edition we're talking about, but there's some places we would say go back to the beginning of the Shemona Esrei, or some places maybe you would think that you should go back to the beginning of that bracha. But in whatever the scenario is, there's an argument. So some say it's not a problem. Others say that it's like you interrupted your prayer with speaking, that you would need to either go back to the beginning or go back to the bracha that you're holding by. And regarding halacha, so normally there's a concept of safek brachos lahakil, that we're lenient. We don't want to add bracha, say brachos for no reason. On the other hand, there is a concept of davening all day, halavai, that a person would daven all day. Therefore, a person is advised to daven a tfilas nedava in such a situation. Now, that is a general concept. Now, when we're talking about the Havdalah, I believe that it's much more lenient, because when it comes to Havdalah, no one mentions that if you mention Havdalah in the second Shemona Esrei and in the first, that you would need to do a tfilas nedava because you added something that's wrong. Why? Why do I say it? What's the reason? Why do the rabbis not say that maybe there you should also do this tfilas nedava, which is your question, Ezra? And the answer is because it's not wrong. You are Saturday night and you're separating in the midst of separating from Shabbos to weekday. So it's actually very apropos on this at this point. Now, the fact is you said it once, you don't need to say it a second time. But on the other hand, it is not like mentioning Rosh Chodesh on a day that's not Rosh Chodesh. It is Saturday night. This is the time to say Havdalah. So because of that, it would not obligate you to do a tfilas nedava afterwards. Okay, any other questions? Yes, Ben.
But Avdallah is a complicated thing too. You have to light a candle. You have to put out the besamim, and how can you forget and do it twice at the same evening?
I'm not sure what you mean.
You said if you did it twice, if
you said
did
it in
on
both
the first
Shemona Esrei.
and the second Shemona Esrei, which
In
you're
both-
doing one after the other, aren't you?
Yeah, but the Shemona Esrei, you're not doing the besamim or the fire.
No, on the Avdallah.
But you're not making Havdalah on wine and on besamim and on a fire twice. You recited it in the prayer Saturday night, and then you did a rectification prayer and you added it in the second one as well. Even though you're not supposed to, but you did.
Well, in the first one, you didn't really do the whole thing.
And then the second one you also didn't do. You did exactly the same thing you did in the first one. Atochen Antonu, you did in the second. Atochen Antonu. That's the example that we're talking about.
And when do you do the candle and the wine and the,
When you get home after shul.
so
After
that's
shul, you go home.
third time you do Avdallah.
Yeah.
Okay, so
We
that's
all
what I
do it
didn't
twice.
understand.
Yeah. No, everyone does Havdalah twice. We all do the Ma'ariv service and shul. And in the Ma'ariv service, in the Shemona Esrei, we say the Atochen Antonu. And then we go home, we do the rabbinic obligation of doing it on wine and with the fire and the besamim, so we we
Okay.
at home do a second one. Here, what happened was I had to daven 2 Shmoneh Esreis at night. So you made a mistake. You davened twice. You said Havdalah twice. Each
Yeah,
Shmoneh
yeah.
Esrei. Yes, Ezra.
Rabbi,
Yeah.
you said, okay, you said, and this is just an operational question. Okay, you said we say the Shmoneh Esrei twice. Do you pause for any amount of time between the first and the second?
That's a good question. I wasn't really getting into the details, the technical details, but it does say you should stop for a moment and say like Ashrei. It does give such a in the laws of doing a tashlumin, you're supposed to say some type of a little prayer in the middle and stop. Don't just jump right into the second one. I'll give you an example. What it says in Shulchan Aruch is it's good to say Ashrei between tefillah and tefillah, even though min hadin, it's enough just to wait the amount of time it takes to walk 4 amos. But it's preferable, of course, to do the Ashrei or another to do Ashrei. It says now it does mention in Zohar that you shouldn't do Mizmor Tehillah LaDavid after Mincha or after Ma'ariv, unless you say it like you're Koirei B'Torah, but not in a sense of obligation. So it doesn't tell you what's better, what you should do instead. But it does mention that in Zohar, you don't. It says not to do it b'Torah's chayva. So I guess in this, I don't know what that really means. In other words, here it's not an obligation; it's telling you to do it as a good thing. Really not obligated to say it. So I guess as long as you realize that, acknowledge that, maybe I guess you could do Ashrei. I don't know. It's interesting how it words it. That you shouldn't do it after Mincha or Ma'ariv unless you say it in not a way of obligation, but just like you're reading the Torah. So I guess it sounds like it's okay. I wonder one second. Let's see what the Mishnah, if the Mishnah Berurah says anything.
So you're talking about Ashrei, correct?
Yeah. In other words, you would say Shmoneh Esrei, and then you would say Ashrei after, and then say another second Shmoneh Esrei. According to halacha, straight halacha, all you have to do is wait Dalet Amos, what it takes to walk, 6 to 8 feet.
Can you say anything else instead of Ashrei?
Oh, can you say anything else? I would assume any Tehillim. I mean, it's good to say Toiv Leimer Ashrei. Here it says good to say Ashrei. Let's see what the regular Shulchan Aruch says. Let me return to. Interesting. I don't see it in the regular Shmoneh Esrei, in the regular Shulchan Aruch. Excuse me. See if it says it here. I guess it's in the Taz. It seems like Daled. Islam Dalet, please. Oh, here it says it. I'm sorry, I missed it. You should say Ashrei. It does say it here. I'm sorry, it does say it in the regular Shulchan Aruch. It says Yoimar Ashrei, in order to stand Gam betfilas tashlumin mitoich divrei tanchumen shel Torah. While you're doing your makeup, you should stand in the midst of tanchumen of Torah, prayer of comfort. And So you should say Ashrei now and not afterwards. And look in the Achronim that they agreed to Huadinim Spal Minchashtayim, Yomer Oida Pam Ashrei. If you're doing Koidem Tefillah Hashniya, you should say a second time Ashrei. Interesting. And this is all L'chatchila. Medina, all you need to do is wait Dalet Amos. So the Mishabura says you should say Ashrei twice. In other words, you finished your Shemona Esrei. Now you want to do a second Shemona Esrei at Mincha time. You should also say another Ashrei before the second Tefillah. Interesting.
But that's
that's like you're doing another Mincha. You're not just doing a second Shemona Esrei Mincha. You should do an Ashrei for the Mincha. So you're doing an Ashrei for the separation, and you're doing an Ashrei for Mincha. And maybe this is what it means then, that the Zohar says, don't say Tehillah LaDavid after Mincha as an obligation. In other words, as the Ashrei before Mincha, because that's sort of Teras Chayva, that's more of an obligation. I wonder if that's what it means. Very interesting.
But what about for Ma'ariv, for Motzei Shabbat? Why would one say Ashrei?
Why would you? The reason it says is because you want to say a Shemona Esrei in the midst of words of Tanchumen, comfort. Now, in Ma'ariv, it does say that you would, if you're making up Mincha, you want to make up the Ashrei of Mincha. That's what the Mishabura brings down here. That to be mashlim the Ashrei that you should have said before Mincha that you missed. But the Achronim say b'shem the Mekubalim not to say Ashrei in Ma'ariv, even though it's because of Mincha. Yesh lahachmir bazeh. So he brings this Zohar that not to do the Ashrei because you missed the because of the Ashrei you missed in Mincha.
Okay.
So that's interesting. So they bring down the same Zohar. But and so basically from the Zohar, the main thing is don't say it as a way of obligation. If you say it in a way of just reading the Torah, fine. But if you would be allowed to say it, and as long as it's not said in a way that you're doing it as an obligation, then it's fine. That's basically the conclusion of all this. But it's a good question. Like, why specifically Ashrei? Isn't there any other words of tanchumen, of comfort that you could use? No one seems to mention from where I'm looking here. No, it doesn't seem to mention any other options of prayers. It gives the Ashrei as the prize prayer. Yes, Yehuda.
Could it be if you're making up Mincha? So Mincha starts with Ashrei.
Yeah. So it mentions that. The problem is that it mentions that would be a reason to do, like, for example, if you missed Mincha, so you want to do an Ashrei for the Mincha you missed, which includes an Ashrei. If you missed Shachris, so now you're doing two Minchas, so you want to do a second Mincha that includes an Ashrei. But the problem is that it seems in the Zohar not to do an Ashrei after a prayer that you're, after a Mincha or a Ma'ariv. In other words, Ashrei you do before a Mincha, but here you're saying it afterwards. So the way to do it is then just that you're reciting it as a way of reading the Torah, but you don't have in mind you're doing it as an obligation. Yes, Ben.
Maybe because Ashrei mentions basically the Beit HaMikdash, because Asher Shebetecha, they mean a Bet Knesset or a Beit HaMikdash, don't they?
Interesting. Well, it uses the term Tanchumen Shel Torah, comfort of Torah.
Yeah, but comfort to who? Comfort to who? To those that sit in your house.
Yeah, it deserves more thought. What is the meaning of that comfort of Torah? Okay, let's continue. So we've been discussing this this whole issue of reciting which prayer to recite first, and if you miss doing twice doing a makeup, you want to do a makeup and do the second Shemona Esrei, do a makeup for one you missed, and so on. The Taisus over here has a very interesting question. He says here, what happens if it's Rosh Chodesh? You missed Mincha. You didn't miss davening Mincha, but you skipped Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. You skipped Ya'aleh v'Yaveh in your Shemona Esrei at Mincha on Rosh Chodesh. So the normal halacha, the regular halacha is that you have to repeat the Shemona Esrei. You missed Mincha. Go and repeat the Shemona Esrei. But you didn't think about it. You forgot that it was Rosh Chodesh. And then at night you said, "Oi, it was Rosh Chodesh, and I didn't say Ya'aleh v'Yaveh in Mincha." And now it's Ma'ariv already. It's after Rosh Chodesh. So the question is, should you do a makeup Shemona Esrei now, Ma'ariv time, and do two Ma'arivs? Because you messed up at Mincha, you missed out on a Rosh Chodesh, you messed up Rosh Chodesh, and the law is you're supposed to do a repetition of the Shemona Esrei because you missed out on Rosh Chodesh. And now it's after Rosh Chodesh. Should you do a makeup Shemona Esrei for Mincha that you missed out? Anyone? Any thoughts? Anyone agree you should do a makeup, or anyone think you shouldn't?
I think you should.
You do a makeup.
If you do a mincha.
So 1 second, Isaac, you think you should do a makeup?
You have to do it. You do a makeup anyway. You always do a makeup.
Yeah.
The question is
But
whether
you
or not
missed
you include the Ya'aleh v'Yaveh in your makeup.
You don't get the full schar.
Why don't you get the full star, Ezra?
Because you didn't say Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. You do the makeup, okay? So you get something because you missed saying the Amidah, but you don't get the full schar because of the fact that it's missing an element of the mincha of Rosh Chodesh.
Okay, so everyone here seems to believe that you missed the Shemona Esrei because you said it without Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. It's considered zero. Your Shemona Esrei is worthless that you said, and now you're going to rectify it by doing a Shemona Esrei. It's not as perfect. Maybe you're missing out Ya'aleh v'Yaveh because now it's not Rosh Chodesh anymore. You could have added a special blessing there, and you didn't. But the fact is, you do a makeup because you missed out on a Shemona Esrei. Well, that's one way of looking at it. There is another way of looking at it, and that is that you did do a Shemona Esrei before, but you missed out Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. But your Shemona Esrei was a Shemona Esrei, and you missed out Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. There's an obligation to go and do another Shemona Esrei because Ya'aleh v'Yaveh is supposed to be recited with a Shemona Esrei. But you don't consider it that you didn't not daven. You davened. You missed out Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. You have to say it again in order to recite Ya'aleh v'Yaveh, because Ya'aleh v'Yaveh is not a prayer that you say on its own. You say it with a Shemona Esrei. You missed out. You have to do it again. Do it again. But did you daven a Shemona Esrei? You did daven a Shemona Esrei. This is another way of looking at it. Now, what happens? It's after Rosh Chodesh, and you're not sure what to do, because if you now repeat a second Shemona Esrei as a makeup, are you going to say Ya'aleh v'Yaveh? No, it's not Rosh Chodesh. It's not Rosh Chodesh now. You're not going to say Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. So is it really helping you? Before you missed Ya'aleh v'Yaveh, you said a Shemona Esrei. You did a Shemona Esrei. It was okay, but you missed Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. You should have said another Shemona Esrei to say Ya'aleh v'Yaveh. Now, what are you going to do? Saturday after Rosh Chodesh, you're going to say another Shemona Esrei, but you're still going to skip Ya'aleh v'Yaveh because it's not Rosh Chodesh anymore. So should you really repeat it? According to this opinion, no, you don't repeat it. So these two views are mentioned in Taisus. Taisus mentions the view of Rabbeinu Yehuda and the view of the Rif. Rabbeinu Yehuda says that you're not going to benefit anything by doing a makeup Shemona Esrei. That's the way Rabbeinu Yehuda holds. And the Rif says, no, you didn't do it. You did nothing. Your Shemana Esrei before was worthless. If it's worthless, then you got to do a makeup Shemana Esrei. If it was a Shemana Esrei, but it just was missing out in Yalav Yavai, then okay, you did a Shemana Esrei, but you missed out Yalav Yavai. Now, what are you going to do? Another Shemana Esrei, there's no benefit. But if your Shemana Esrei without Yalav Yavai is worthless, then now you're going to benefit, because now you'll benefit by saying another Shemana Esrei because you're going to do a makeup. Now, these two views have many, there are many situations and many laws that change based on these two views. One of them, I'll give you an example. If there's a mitzvah, a person's supposed to say 100 brachas every day. You did your Shemona Esrei of without Yalav Yava on Rosh Chodesh. So you repeated Shemona Esrei. Does your first Shemona Esrei that you said without Yalav Yava, does that count to your 100 brachas? If it's a good Shemona Esrei, you just missed Yalav Yava. So you count it towards the 100 brachas every day. A person's supposed to say 100 blessings. But if that Shemona Esrei is worthless, then you don't have 100 brachas. Another difference is, let's say your Shemona Esrei, let's say that officially you're not supposed to eat before davening. So you davened without Yalav Yava, and now you got to repeat it. Are you allowed to eat before the repetition? If the first Shemona Esrei was considered a Shemona Esrei, then if it was considered a Shemona Esrei, then you davened already. So it would seem like you could eat. The second Shemona Esrei, but if the first one was not considered a davening, then you wouldn't be allowed to eat according to the straight halacha. Of course, nowadays people eat before davening because of health reasons, but according to straight halacha, you wouldn't be. Another example would be if a person is benching. This is a very interesting example. If a person is benching on Shabbos, now what happens if you miss Ritzei? So Friday night and Shabbos day, the first two meals of Shabbos, if you miss Ritzei, you have to repeat the benching. The third meal, Shalosh Udas, you don't have to repeat benching if you miss Ritzei. So the scenario will be, if you are benching, doing the grace after meal and having someone else in mind, you're at the third meal of Shabbos. I'm sorry, you're at the second meal of Shabbos and you missed Ritzei. And you're having this other person in mind who finished his third meal of Shabbos. So you're being mitzi someone else in benching because he doesn't know how to say the brachas or whatever. So you're having him in mind. So you missed Ritzei, and he's on his third meal. So if your prayer is considered a prayer, if your benching is a benching, but you just have to repeat it. So for him, he doesn't need to repeat it. Your benching was a good benching, and he's at his third meal. He doesn't need to say Ritzei. If he misses Ritzei, he doesn't have to repeat it. You have to repeat your benching, but he can go scot-free now. He's free. He benched. He missed Ritzei, but he's okay. You did a good benching. You got to repeat it because you're in the middle of your second meal. However, if the benching is not considered a benching at all, if you miss Ritzei, then he's not fulfilling his obligation either because your whole benching was worthless. So there are numerous differences regarding these two opinions of if your Shemona Esrei is considered a Shemona Esrei. Another interesting difference might be if Yalav Yavai, is it really considered, is it part and parcel of the Shemona Esrei or not? Which means that maybe you could maybe the laws of saying it quietly don't necessarily apply to Yalav V'Yava. In other words, is it part and parcel of Shemoneh Esrei? Then it has all the laws of Shemoneh Esrei. But if it's just a prayer that's like an add-on, maybe it doesn't have all the laws, and that's why some people scream out Yalav V'Yava while they're in the middle of Shemoneh Esrei, because maybe it doesn't have all the laws of the Shemoneh Esrei that you're supposed to say everything quietly. Often people like to remind everyone in the middle of the davening, they'll say Yalav V'Yava when they're up to it. So this could be a difference of these two opinions. If it's considered part and parcel of the Shemoneh Esrei and you miss it, you as if you didn't daven Shemoneh Esrei. It has the same laws as Shemoneh Esrei. But if it's sort of like an addition to the Shemoneh Esrei, you fulfilled your Shemoneh Esrei obligation. Now it's just an obligation of Yalav V'Yava. You're supposed to say it with the Shemoneh Esrei, so you got to repeat it. But the Yalav V'Yava itself, maybe maybe there's room for leniency to say those words out loud. And so that would be another interesting difference. In any event, this is a very popular two views, and it really boils down to the question of, is a prayer without the addition, is that considered a prayer at all, or is it considered worthless? And that's basically this long taisvus on the side. We're going to do a little. Let's start the next piece of Gemara. Itmar. We are 10 lines, 12 lines down from the top of the page. Itmar Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina Omar. Rabbi Yosi, the son of Rabbi Chanina, said, Tfilois avos tiknu. The prayers the patriarchs established. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi Amar Tfilois keneged tmidim tiknu. Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi says the prayers are corresponding to the tmidin, to the regular daily sacrifices. Tanya Kabasei Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina, but Tanya Kabasei Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. We have a brisa that follows the view of Rabbi Yosi Rabbi Chanina. In other words, the brisa implies that it's the patriarchs established the prayers, but not implies. The brisa says it. And Tanya Chavosei, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi.
5 minutes, okay? I'm online. It's over at 11 o'clock.
The Tanya Chavosei, Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi. We have a brisa that goes according to the view, according to this statement of Rabbi Yeshua ben Levi, where the brisa says that the prayers are corresponding to the sacrifice. Tanya, obviously, Rabbi Chanina, we have the brisa that goes according to that says according to the statement of Rabbi Yosi, Rabbi Chanina, Avraham tiken tefillah shachris. Abraham started the morning prayer, as it says. Avram got up in the morning to the place Asher Amasham, where he stood. And what does that mean? Where he stood? Bein amid el tefillah. And standing place where he stood means that he prayed there. So he got up in the morning. The Gemara's understanding to mean that it means that he established a morning prayer. And how do we know that standing means prayer? Shenemar, as it says, Vayami Pinchas Vayapalel, that Pinchas stood up and prayed. So we see standing and prayer go hand in hand. And when it says Avram to the place where he stood, it means the place where he prayed. And he got up in the morning to do that, and that means that in the morning there is a concept that Avraham established called prayer Shacharis, the morning prayer. Yitzchak established the Mincha prayer, and Shenemar, as it says, Yitzchak went out to speak in the field towards evening. What does it mean to speak? Lasuach, it means to say words of prayer. Shenemar, as it says, tefillah, a prayer of a poor man who enwraps himself. And before Hashem, he pours his siach, his words of prayer. So siach means prayer, words of prayer. So lasuach means to say prayer. So this was towards evening. So Yitzchak established mincha. Yaakov tiken tefillas arvis. Yaakov established the night prayer. And what is the prayer that Yaakov established? Remember, as it says, "Vayifka b'makom vayolin sham," that he reached the place. It says by Jacob, Yaakov, he reached the place and he rested there. He slept there. Ve'ein pigia ela tefillah. Reaching, the word pigia also means prayer. Shenemar, as it says, ve'ata al tispal b'adam hazev al tisa b'adam rino tefillah al tifkab. Don't pray for them, and don't val tifkabi means don't come to me in prayer. And so the point is that pigia means prayer, and it says vayifka b'makam that Jacob reached a place where he prayed. So we see that in the case of places talking about it was evening, it got dark, and so because it got dark, Yaakov he stopped there, and it says vayifka. So we see that he established the night prayer called Ma'ariv. So that's a brisa that we see follows this idea that the patriarchs established the prayers. Now, even this opinion agrees that nevertheless the prayers were connected. The rabbis connected the prayers with the corresponding to the sacrifices. But who initiated them is the patriarchs. And tomorrow, Mitzvah Hashem will learn more about the other opinion of the sacrifices, and will also give us an understanding of why the specific times of each of the prayers. Okay, have a wonderful day, everyone.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Okay.
Thank you.
everybody.
Take care, everyone.
Thank you,
Bye-bye.
Rebbe.
Bye-bye. Bye-bye.